afternoon theme of apologetics that doesn't feel like calculus. And once again, this is not meant to be exhaustive. This is not meant to silence all the difficult questions. It's not meant to be this thing that we can say, well, look, matter of fact, I know some people that it's like, okay, just go to that sermon and that'll answer all your questions. It's not meant to be that. It's not meant to be that. But it's meant to be something to really encourage our personal faith. Additionally, it's meant to be something that is relevant to our human experience. Relevant to our human experience. Once again, I doubt that somebody is laying up in bed at night thinking about the ontological argument of God, and that being the crucial moment that they, you know what, I converted when I understood the ontological argument. I highly doubt that happens very often. For most of us, as human beings, we, like I said, we work our jobs, we pay our bills, we have these families, we want good things for ourselves and our families. That's really what kind of we're here doing. That's really what we're here doing. And so I was thinking about that. That's very, very relevant to our idea of apologetics. Apologetics. Can somebody, Billy, you didn't read this morning. Can you get 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse number 15? We're familiar with this passage, but I want to re-emphasize this. And once again, we're going to get to my term I'm coining that eventually everybody's going to end up using it one day. But 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse number 15, what does that say? This is where we get our word apologetics. What does it say?
But sanctify the Lord God in your heart, and always be ready to give a defense for everyone who asks for the reason for the hope that is within you, with meekness and in fear.
Meekness and in fear. You have to have some respect about it. But the idea, you got to give a defense. Defending the faith, and answer back. Whenever there's an accusation or whenever there's like a legal sense in which you need evidence for something or defending against something, you give your defense. But Baker, if you can go to Philippians chapter 1. Philippians chapter 1, what does verse number 7 say? Here's my point. Here's my term. I'm pointing. What does it say?
Just as it is right for me to think this of you all, because I have you in my hearts, inasmuch as both in my chains and in the defense and confirmation of the gospel, you all are partakers with me of grace.
Confirmation of the gospel. That word confirmation comes from the Greek word biosis. That biosis. And so we're not only apologists, we're biosists. We're trying to confirm as well. It's not just about saying, well, I can just shoot down every other argument. But can we make a good case? Can we make a good case for our faith? Can we make a good case for it? Not just defend it, but can we make a solid case for it? And there's a couple things I want us to consider for a very short time this afternoon. 3 things in particular about the origin, considering the origin of some of the things that we hold very dear to us. And I would argue that if we didn't have, I'm just going to bring out 3 things tonight, or this afternoon. If we didn't have these 3 things, society as a whole would essentially just deteriorate and collapse. It would deteriorate and collapse. Now, when we think about the influence that God has on a society, I think we are incredibly fortunate. We live in America. We live particularly in the South. I think are we technically in the Bible Belt? Kind of ish. We're a little bit, yeah. We're in an area that is greatly influenced by religion and the Bible. And that is seen in little things that we don't always recognize, but it's there. Whereas you go in other places that are completely either atheistic or not influenced by the Bible, the society looks a lot different. So some of the things that we're talking about is some things that we say, well, yeah, duh, obviously, we don't need to think about that. But in other places, it's not always the case. Places that don't have God, minds that don't have God, families that don't have God, it doesn't look great. And as a matter of fact, we talked about last week, one of the proofs is whenever you see how a life looks without God, eventually it doesn't end up looking good. It never ends well. So the first thing I want us to consider is justice. I want to think about justice. Now, justice, oftentimes you'll hear the term social justice, basically the idea of right and wrong, morality, but also fairness. Thinking about fairness. Where does this idea of fairness come from? Why is it the case that whenever you turn on the news, there's something about trafficking going on. There's something about some sort of hateful activity going on. Someone gets killed. Just bad things happen. And then in ourselves, we're like, that's not right. Unfortunately, we become quite numb to some of these things because we just see all the time. Yeah, somebody's always getting something happening to them. But at the end of the day, there's a point where we say, if someone says, hey, is that right? We gotta come out. Honestly. We think about things like racism. We think about things like the genocides of histories, different things like that. We look back and we say, that's not right. That's not just. It's not fair. Additionally, you have our court system, which was supposed to be, where a person comes and is blind to the individuals that are there, but they hear out what's going on and they make a fair decision. They make a fair decision. So when we see a court case that happens where it's like, that person did not get what they deserved, we say, that's not fair, it's unjust. Jesus was probably one of the most unjust situations that ever happened. A man that was not only punished for something that he didn't do, but he was brutally tortured and brutally punished for things that we did as people. But he didn't deserve what he got. And that's the idea of justice. When we think about justice and morality, strongly think about where do these things come from. If we contrast this with, say, an atheistic mentality or an incredibly secular mentality, what atheism/evolution tells us is that we were simply just, everything around us just came by accident. The survival of the fittest and the strongest survived. Over time, eventually came about to where now we have the scenario that we have around us. And if that's the case, we're just really a tiny speck, a very tiny speck in the millions and billions and trillions of time that has happened, that's taken place. So if that's the case, that we come to this current situation where the survival, fittest, the strong survive, all those things, it would be the case that it would continue on the same way. It would continue on the same way. Therefore, if that's the case, then there is really no basis for justice. There's no basis for right or wrong. We see child trafficking on the TV, we might as well just say, oh, they were stronger than the kids. That's essentially what that boils down to. Incredibly dark. And as a matter of fact, there's a guy, I don't know if y'all may know him, there's a guy named Alex O'Connor. He's one of the more popular atheist people out in the media right now. He actually has gotten to the point where he says, yeah, there's no objective morality. There's really not. He's actually consistent with the ideas of those things. Yeah, there's no objective. You do what you do, and no one can say whether it's right or wrong. And we have to ask ourselves, is that a world that we want to live in? Nobody in their right mind will say, yeah, I want that. No. And as a matter of fact, some atheists have even said, look, I don't believe in God, but I appreciate what it produces. Because it produces societies that are sound, and it produces societies that have some respect for each other. But at the end of the day, the atheistic, secular, evolutionary model doesn't allow for objective morals. I can smack you upside the face, and it means nothing. You can do something good for me, and it means absolutely nothing. Nothing really matters. Nothing's really right, nothing's really wrong. Even the idea of consent. Well, if someone consents, where'd that come from either? There is no basis, there's no undergirding, there's no end point, there's no essential judge to look to say, hey, is this right or is this wrong? Is this good or is this bad? None of that exists in an atheistic evolutionary model, truly. And so when we come to us as Christians, of course, we're not here trying to debate this with ourselves all the time. But I want us to have a certain appreciation for that we just kind of automatically assume. We automatically assume. Whenever we were renting out our place in College Station, one of the things I really wanted was a Christian to be in my room. And the reason why is because if you tear up my place, I don't have just the law to appeal to. In my mind, I have something greater than our local law to appeal to. That's the law of God. It's like, hey man, at the end of the day, at least, if take out the legal stuff, can we abide by God? Can we abide by God? You remember whenever Joseph was in Potiphar's house and Potiphar's wife was trying to entice him? He said, I'm not going to do this sin against my God. I'm not going to do this sin against my God. This was before the Moses law. This was before all that. There's a relationship with God I'm trying to maintain. And so when it comes to us as Christians and our relationship with each other, and our relationship with mankind in general, God has made every single one of us in His image. And if that is the case, that means that each and every one of us deserve respect, we deserve fair treatment, and we deserve to be treated right. We deserve to be treated as if we are in the same boat. We're of the same image. Matter of fact, we talked about that, 4 or 5 months ago? With loving your neighbor as yourself. Loving your neighbor as yourself comes back to we're all made in the image of God. We're all from the same dust. We're going to go back to the same dust. But at the end of the day, it all ends up in God. Without God there, you have no justice, you have no morality, and you have none of those things that really uphold a society. And as a matter of fact, what some people are not really... Some of the people that I've talked to that move from various states for political reasons, a lot of it has to do with they're not even upholding their own law. Take everything else away. They said, I don't even want to raise my kids in that. I don't want to raise my kids in that. When I was in San Francisco, walking around with a friend of mine, and we went into one of these shops on the Berkeley campus, and one of the shop owners was talking about how a homeless person came in. The shop owner was there and his mom was there. A homeless person came in. He's like, okay, whatever. The homeless person spat in his mom's face. And the shop owner was like, so I defended my mother. The cops get called, and the cops start questioning the shop owner as to why he was defending his mom. And he was like, because this homeless person spat in her face. What else am I supposed to do? And eventually, it turned out they did nothing with the homeless person. They said, what? You just gotta do it. You just gotta do it. Nobody wants to be in that. Nobody wants to be around that. But all that comes from God. Ultimately, it all comes from God. Secondly, when we think about the idea of hope, I was going to end on this, but I wanted to switch it. When we think about the idea of hope, in an atheistic, secular, or evolutionary worldview, once again, we came here by accident over a course of time, and survival of the fittest, only the strong survive. Hope is really just meaningless. Hope is meaningless. It's actually just your brain playing a biological trick on you, just to trick you to say, hey, keep trying hard and maybe something good will happen. That really doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. All of us, I'm sure, like a story to end well. There was one story I saw that it ended very abruptly. I read it. It ended abruptly, and it ended with it wasn't a happy ending. And it made me feel a certain way. I was like, this is it? And every last one of us, even though we know the ending is probably going to be good, we still are emotional through movies, we're emotional through books, we're emotional through all these stories. Why? Because within us, built within us, by design, is our desire for a better ending. Our desire for a better ending. Our desire for good ultimately to win. When we look at the story of God, ultimately shown in Christ, Jesus had to come back from the dead. It couldn't have been the case that, he died and he was the sacrifice for our sins, but he's just not gone. It wouldn't work, because that's not really a happy ending. But him raising from the dead and coming out victorious and ascending and receiving the kingdom, receiving dominion, all that shows that, hey, there's going to be a happy ending. Everything is going to work out to good. Everything, all the knots are going to be untied. All the things, all the I's are going to be dotted, T's are going to be crossed. Everything is going to work itself out. And within us, we appreciate that idea of hope. And so when it comes to the world that we see today, oftentimes we get very discouraged. Oftentimes we get to a point where we feel hopeless. As a matter of fact, there was a guy who was an artist, and he was talking about how he makes music for people who have no hope. He said he's been there. He's been on the edge where he's like, why am I even here? What is there to do with my life? What's the point? It's all just gonna in an atheistic worldview, you're just a monkey that is just a very sophisticated monkey at this point, and you're just going to end up just like that. It means nothing. That produces a very, very dark mindset, where you make it to where what you do doesn't matter, you can hurt people doesn't matter, you can help people doesn't matter, nothing ever matters. And it ends up very, very hopeless. Very hopeless. And that is not the frame of mind that God has provided for us. The story of God has shown us that there is hope at the end and there's something to be attained. There's a promise to actually be realized. The hope of heaven, Colossians chapter 1 and verse number 5, the hope of heaven has to be something that is real. It has to be something that is actually attainable and something that we can say, I want to work towards that. But additionally, there's also the hope of betterment in this life. If we apply the biblical principles, it'll work out for our good. And all of that comes from God. Every last bit of it. If you take God out of the equation, you have really nothing to work towards. You have nothing to work ultimately for. And everything is just for the here and now. Which now is why you see people say, well, just get money, get the women, get the cars, get the house. I'm just going to die anyways. That's what that produces. Once again, we know that that does not lead to fulfillment. It leads to a lot of emptiness, actually, but it doesn't lead to fulfillment, and it doesn't do any good for anybody but that one person. Those things don't benefit society. But if you take out hope, if you take out God, that's what you're left with. It's what you're left with. Finally, I want to think about love. Ultimately, we learn that God is love. Everything that he did, everything that he does, his creation, all comes from the place of love. All comes from love. If this is the case, when we think about creation, when we think about our own personal relationships with each other, when we think about our relationships with our family, our relationships with ourselves, if love is not in there, really think about what you have. What do you have? You take an atheistic mentality, and that would tell us that this idea of love is just our brain firing off chemicals, and it's just to trick us and elude us to make it to where we can get further in our survival, because we understand that when we do things together, we tend to survive better. Additionally, if that happens, then you can also continue on your seed, continue your bloodline by having more offspring. And all love is really just utility. Love is simply a means to an end to get whatever you want or need, ultimately survival. So I thought about the idea of a mother or father running into a burning building to save their child. A mother running into a building to save her child. Someone would think, why would she do that? She might get hurt. The mother's not thinking about that. The mother's thinking about that child. And then you say, okay, well, yeah, that's her only child. Yeah, they want to continue on their seed. Okay, let's say she has 10 children. She has 10 children, and one of them, let's say she has 20 children, and one of them runs in the burning building, or one of them is in the burning building. Do you think that she'll still go in that burning building to save that one child? I bet you she will. Why? Because she loves the child. Well, I got 19 others, they can continue on the seed, so here's what it is. That's essentially what that atheistic kind of mentality, where love is just simply utility, a means to an end. That child actually helps our survival, so now we have more resources and less people to worry about. That's what that produces. Very, very, very dark stuff. And I'm sure that none of us would ever cross our minds. To think of someone just in terms of their utility. But unfortunately, in the world, that's a lot of what we have. We have people that their only reason why they mess with you is because of what you can do for them. Because of what you can do for them. You take out your utility to them, you out of their mind. Saw this all the time in the business world. Dudes would either secure a deal, or they would recognize that this person either didn't have the money or they weren't their right customer fit, and so they just like, okay, whatever. Wouldn't talk to them ever again. Wouldn't do anything with them. Why? Because they only saw that person for what they could give them. But true love, we think about the parable whenever we talked about, Jesus said, which one of you having 99 sheep, if he doesn't lose one, or 100 sheep, wouldn't leave the 99 and go after that one? Take out 20. Whenever the allusion to Christ as a good shepherd, and one goes astray, leaving the 99. Why would you leave 99? You already have 99 others. He leaves that because he loves the one. He loves the one. To the point that he was willing to sacrifice himself for mankind. For us individually as well. We watched the movie King of Kings last night, and there was a scene where you had the illusion was Jesus switching places. Jesus switching places. It showed someone kind of drowning, and they needed Jesus to save them, and it showed Jesus not only picking that person up, but he turned him around and he pushed him out of the water, and Jesus went down into the water. So showing, in my brain, what I interpreted from it, was not only was Jesus willing to save us, but he was willing to switch places, sacrificially. So you take the burning house example, burning building example. What if you have a situation where the mother can choose to sacrifice her own life for the life of the child? I bet you she would do it. I bet you she would do it. It does no good for herself. As a matter of fact, it kills her. But she would do it. And she would probably do it 10 times out of 10. I'm sure that each one of us with children would sacrifice your life for your child. I'm sure. And the reason why is because you love them. And that is simply just a small window in what God has put in us by design. What God has put in us by design. When we are made in God's image, we're made to reflect Him and His values. God is love. There's a sense in which that just is a little tiny snippet of the way God feels towards us. Ultimately shown in the person of Jesus Christ, coming and laying down His life, not for when we were at our best, not for when we were had everything, all our ducks in a row, but rather when we were sinners, when we were enemies towards Him. When we were the worst of the worst, it says Christ came and died. He sacrificed. He switched places. I do not know many people that are willing to say, yeah, I'll just let my kid just go. No. No. We know intuitively we have these loving relationships with the people that we love, and our families and our children particularly. That comes from God. And you take God out of that, you're left with nothing. You're left with utility. You're left with, well, they got what they got. You're left with, well, they just overtook them. That's just what happened. It is what it is. Let's just move on with our lives because we're all just going to end up dying anyway. Doesn't mean anything. Just a dreadful, dreadful mindset to be in. And we can be like, well, that's just exaggerating. Nobody thinks like that. I will venture to say that there's individuals, our society, especially if it's based on these atheistic ideas, people intuitively know that's what that means. That's what that means. That's where that's going. And I hope to bring these ideas out to encourage us to be a good influence towards those around us. And honestly, I'll say it to feel a little bit of pity. To feel a little bit of pity. Because if you have someone that they just have no hope, that is a pitiable person. I read in this book, they made the point, they said, would you want to be in their shoes? They took this person, they said, oh, they're frustrated. You said, okay, look at their situation. Would you want to be in their shoes? It's like, well, no. Then they should be pitied. If you don't want to even be in their shoes, they probably don't want to be in their own shoes. I would not like to be in a position to think that I have no hope, that I have nothing to gain from anything, that the sense of justice that I feel and that I recognize and that I want to happen not only for myself but for those that I love, that someone else or somebody else out there that says, they got what they got. I would hate to be in a position to not feel any sort of love from anybody else. No true love. Not like, well, what can I get from you? Like, actually, truly, like, no, I just love you because you are who exist. You're made in God's image. A lot of people don't feel that. A lot of people don't recognize that, and a lot of people feel the opposite. Often because, in large part, because of the education and secularization of our modern society. We are told that we just come from accident, the strong survive, it's all just kind of, we're not going nowhere, it doesn't really mean anything, and that wears on people's souls. It wears on people's hearts. I want to encourage us, let's not just take this apologetic material and say, man, I'm really glad we have, yes, absolutely. But I want to encourage us to consider this with other people. Consider this with other people. And I don't know how many atheistic individuals that everybody here knows, but it doesn't have to be this whole mental gymnastics. It could simply be, why do we think that we love our children? What do we gain from that? Where does that come from? As a matter of fact, that sacrificial love is the opposite of everything that atheism promotes. Everything that evolution promotes. Sacrificial love? No, you don't belong to species by sacrificial love. No. That all comes from God. The idea of hope, wanting to realize and gain a better future and better something for ourselves, all that comes from God. The idea of objective morality and wanting justice and fairness for everybody involved, regardless if they're powerful, regardless if they're poor, regardless if they're rich, regardless of all those things, just because they're human beings, that's not taught in an evolutionary mindset. That comes from God. And I hope we internalize some of those things and recognize, hey, we might not even notice that some of the things that God has influenced our brains and our society, it comes from Him. We might not recognize that. But I hope to kind of bring out some of those things. If you have any congregation, come down and stand next to me.